In the return of the Marksville Wrestling Podcast, we discuss all the new developments in AEW, such as the signing of Kazuchika Okada, AEW Big Business, and more. We will also be covering WWE Elimination Chamber Perth and TNA's No Surrender pay-per-view. All that is to come in this episode of the Marksville Wrestling Podcast. My name is Owen. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after this. Looking for Marksville on social media? You can find us on Instagram at Marksville Wrestling, YouTube at Marksville Wrestling, and on Mastodon at Marksville Wrestling at MastodonSocial.com. Now back to the show. Well, hello and welcome back to Marksville Wrestling, the home of positive pro wrestling content. It has been a while. I was actually out sick, but we are back ready to bring positivity to the world of pro wrestling like we always do. And today I wanted to discuss the AEW announcements that have been kind of just coming out of the floodgates recently. We obviously already knew that Big Business was going to be taking place Wednesday, March 13th. The day, as of I'm recording this, is 3 days away. So we got a lot to be excited for there, but they have announced the card, and we do know that Okada has actually been announced as a signee to AEW before Big Business. A lot of people thought he was going to make his debut on Big Business, but no, he actually appeared on March 6th Dynamite, and we'll go ahead and get into his contract details. But like I said, there's just been a lot of announcements in regards to AEW recently. We had Okada signing, we had Big Business. Obviously, Revolution just took place, and you will be getting a review for that, so keep an eye out for the AEW Revolution review. But they also announced AEW Dynasty and new branding for AEW Dynamite, new set and new logos. So a lot has been taking place in AEW recently, and we're going to go ahead and dive into that right now. So first off, Kazuchika Okada, kind of the hot button topic, I would say, from this, recent cascade of announcements. Just because Okada was a huge free agent. And there was a lot of speculation that he probably was going to show up in AEW, but again, most people thought it was going to take place March 13th at Big Business. Ended up happening a week earlier on March 6th. Dynamite came out during a segment with the Young Bucks, and then obviously they did the classic AEW Kazuchika Okada is all elite post on Twitter and Instagram. After he appeared on television. So now that we are here, we know that obviously he did not pick TNA or WWE, and most people did at this point kind of already know it was going to AEW. His destination would be AEW, but we know that for sure now. And let's go ahead and look into his contract details. So Dave Meltzer, obviously, biggest journalist in wrestling, reported that Kazuchika Okada signed a 3-year deal with AEW. So 3 years is probably, it's good for them. It's good to get Okada in there for more than a year, but it does kind of leave some question. 3 years, Okada is not going to be at the end of his career by any means. So he will still likely have plenty of suitors if they are not able to agree on an extension. But he will be in AEW for at least 3 years, assuming everything goes right. And that is a big, time frame for him to be able to show what he can do in the promotion. And contract details have been reportedly leaked. But again, this is still kind of an early contract, only took place on the 6th, which as of recording is 4 days ago. So, still stuff that could change, still language about the contract that could be different in the long term. But it looks like Tokyo Sports reports that Kazuchika Okada's contract with AEW is 3 years and is worth $13.5 million. That's good for about $4.5 million every year. Now, if that's true, that seems like a contract that pretty much, I guess I would say, makes sense for Okada. He is a, hot property, big talent. Obviously, there's a lot about his character that has to do with money, but in real life too, he's just a big talent that you want on your program, and therefore he's going to garner a lot of money and a lot of suitors. A lot of people want his talent on their show, so 4.5 million makes a lot of sense for him. 4.5 million per year, that is. And I do think that while WWE may have been able to pay the same or more, they may not have been willing to, book him the way he might want to be booked, or they may not have been able to give him sort of the creative freedoms that perhaps he was looking for in AEW. Obviously, great friends with the Young Bucks, who are EVPs, and he likely has a good amount of creative control on his contract in AEW. Not that I know, because those details have yet to come out, but if I had to guess, there's likely a decent balance in regards to him as a wrestler, but also him as a manager of his own character, if I had to guess. And I do think that Okada, his style of wrestling and his fan base and his sort of just gravitas, his reputation, I would say all those things kind of lean toward AEW. Just generally, the trends of all of those things are very much AEW inclined. Not to say he wouldn't fit in at WWE and they wouldn't take care of him. But I just think that it is likely his fans and the people who have supported him from day one do kind of look to AEW as that place for him and as a place that would fit him better than WWE. WWE has gotten some flack for taking international stars who are very popular in their respective countries, and then kind of quashing their fame and their momentum once they sign with WWE. Obviously, a lot of people feel that way about Shinsuke Nakamura. A lot of people feel that way about Andrade El Idolo. Although that's kind of a special case because AEW did not do very well with him either. But WWE does have a tendency to feel like, they prioritize homegrown American stars rather than independent stars who grew their career in Japan or another foreign country like that. So I think just anecdotally, it seems like a great signing, but we're obviously going to have to see what EW has for him, and we're going to have to see how they deliver. So after that signing, I wanted to discuss the AEW Dynasty. So AEW Dynasty is a new pay-per-view that they are adding to their schedule in April. We, like I said, just had Revolution. Generally, it would go Revolution, and I'm not mistaken, Double or Nothing after that, but they have Dynasty now in between the two, and we're gonna have to see what they do because the AEW does not post their full pay-per-view schedule in the same way that WWE does. In WWE, you can pretty much see the pay-per-view schedule in entirety for the whole year once New Year's rolls around. From January to December, everything is booked out. Arenas, times, names of the pay-per-views, even the main events at times will already be booked. But AEW does not quite operate the same way, so we can't really tell exactly what's going to happen after Dynasty. But again, it typically goes Revolution, then Double or Nothing, and now we have presumably Dynasty in between the two. So Dynasty taking place in St. Louis on Sunday, April 21st. It will be the inaugural Dynasty event, and it is also, like I mentioned, AEW's first pay-per-view in the month of April. It's at the Chaifetz Arena in St. Louis, Missouri, and again, taking place on Sunday, April 21st. One thing I wanted to mention about Dynasties, they already have booked the main event, which will be Will Ospreay and Bryan Danielson, who faced off on AEW Collision and kind of just started to set the tone for their match. It's good, obviously, very early. They're going to have to build momentum for the pay per view card. But yeah, it looks like that will be the first match announced on the card, and it will be the main event. So now that we've discussed that, I wanted to cover AEW Big Business. I mentioned already that this was the pay-per-view, special AEW special episode of Dynamite that we did kind of think Okada would be debuting on, but actually he was debuted before, and now he will be booked in a match with the Elite. And I will go ahead and get into the rest of the card. But I just want to cover AEW Big Business again, happening this Wednesday on Dynamite, not a pay per view, but it is a AEW special episode of Dynamite, Wednesday, March 13th at the TD Garden in Boston. Same old time, same old place, AEW Dynamite, Wednesday, TBS 8/7 Central. So after AEW Collision, they ended up adding 2 matches to the card, and now we have a full card that looks like this. An AEW World Championship match. Samoa Joe, obviously the reigning champion, taking on Wardlow, Eddie Kingston, Penta El Zero Miedo, Pac versus Kazuchika Okada and the Young Bucks. But a good, more accurate name for that trio would be the Elite, because that's who they are. Darby Allin versus Jay White in a singles bout. Willow Nightingale versus Riho in the women's match of the night. And Chris Jericho and Hook taking on the Gates of Agony. So that's your current card for AEW Big Business. 5 matches. I would say for AEW Dynamite, they generally announce about that number 5, maybe 6 matches. And then a few things get added to the card. Obviously, they're going to have promo segments, backstage segments. I think the biggest thing to look out for, well, I don't think. I know the biggest thing to look out for on this card is the arrival or presumed arrival of Mercedes Moné, formerly Sasha Banks in WWE. Everyone is looking for her to debut on this episode of Dynamite. And again, people thought that would coincide with the arrival of Okada, but he will actually have his first match in the AEW, as he was signed last week. And we will get likely the debut of Mercedes Moné, and unless anything sort of unexpected happens, she will likely be the only debut on this show. We did have Kyle O'Reilly debut on Revolution, which was a surprise. Not a debut, though, more of a return. It had just been a while since he was last on AEW programming. But I will say, we didn't really expect that. There weren't many rumors on the dirt sheets about that, and it did happen. So there's always chances for people to show up who we don't expect. And I should mention that even though we do expect Moné to debut, there's a possibility that doesn't happen either. So it's really just going to be a wait and see. But, when AEW does these specials at larger arenas, there's always expected to be kind of a debut or a new signing or something that's a really big deal taking place on that show. And I mean, the name says it all. Big Business with a $sign in the logo is very much telegraphing if you've ever seen it. So without further ado, I will go ahead and get on to the last piece of AEW news, but I should mention that you will be getting a review of AEW Big Business later in the week. So keep an eye out for that. As always, the podcasts always drop first on the Patreon page, patreon.com/Marksville Wrestling. So keep an eye out for those, but you can also find the podcast on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. If you just go to the link in my bio on Instagram, you can find all those places that I post my podcasts. So without further ado, let's get into the AEW branding. Obviously, AEW Dynamite has undergone a few different identities since it debuted back in 2019 on TNT originally, then switching to TBS every Wednesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 Central. 5 Pacific, and they have changed the branding. So AEW's Dynamite started out with a color palette that was very much rainbow inspired, kind of looking like a color festival in India, or one of those celebrations where um, colored powders are thrown in the air, and it almost evoked NXT 2.0 in a way, but obviously Dynamite came before, so that would be the inspiration rather than a copy. But regardless, they moved away from that, went to kind of a more mainstream, modern, clean look to kind of um, not make them look like WWE, but just to kind of modernize it and make it look more maybe professional and simple. They were going with a very black, blue, and red color scheme. And a lot of squares, a lot of neon lights of just blue and red, and kind of bland feeling, kind of plain, kind of corporate. I think a lot of people liked the original branding of Dynamite, so when they changed it, people were not super happy. And now we have kind of a whole new direction entirely with the AEW Dynamite branding. They have brought back the entrance tunnels, which was something a lot of fans wanted. And they have also changed the backdrop to this kind of weird metal, almost like a steel girder motif, but a little more futuristic. And the tunnels are very bright, and they almost look like Omega symbols. Like if you think of Kenny Omega's logo, for example, they almost look like that, but not quite. They have changed elements of the Jumbotron as well. The screens above the set have changed a little bit, but I would say the biggest change to the set is those tunnels coming back, the backdrop behind the tunnels, and of course the logo. So the AEW Dynamite logo has changed again. The font is entirely different. The script logo has been completely changed, and it's a jagged, sharp font, almost kind of evoking comic book or action movie type of fonts. And it's back to sort of the rainbow. There's a lot of orange involved, but there's a lot of rainbow colors, bright pinks, bright blues, bright sort of, over the top colors to sort of evoke the original look of the show. But I would say it's a little bit more professional and toned down. They are doing a little bit of a gradient motif with the colors too. But yeah, so just as you can tell, AEW is changing a lot about its programming, adding pay-per-views, adding specials, signing entirely new and exciting stars, and they're really trying to beef up their reputation since it has taken a hit in recent months. But again, this is the most positive podcast in pro wrestling, so we try to keep it positive here and just hope that the show gets better, the product gets better. Tony Khan continues to listen to the fans, and hopefully all it can do is go up from here. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and head into the next segment right after this quick break. The Marksville Wrestling Podcast is brought to you by Patreon. Patreon.com/Marksville Wrestling is where you can find the podcast early before it drops on other platforms, and it is also the home of exclusive behind-the-scenes content, Q&As, and more. If you like the show and would like to support it, please consider doing so on Patreon. Again, that's patreon.com/Marksville Wrestling. Thanks for the support, and back to the show. It is now time to review WWE's Elimination Chamber pay-per-view, as well as TNA's No Surrender. We're going to go ahead and start with Elimination Chamber, just because it was the older pay-per-view, and we want to make sure that we catch everybody up on the WWE timelines and storylines and current feuds going into WrestleMania, now that the show is only less than a month away at this point, which is crazy. Taking place April 6th through 7th, obviously in Philadelphia. And without further ado, let's go ahead and review Elimination Chamber Perth. So, I will say that, going into the show, there was a little bit of predictability in regard to who would win the main event, but also who would win the chamber matches. So, you know, don't get me wrong, Nia Jax is no slouch, but Rhea Ripley, the hometown hero, been a very dominant champion, and I think that's why it was easy for me to say that that main event was pretty decently predictable. But again, you have those elimination chamber matches that were a big deal. Obviously, they are the namesake of the show itself for good reason, but they were also generally predictable, and I think it was kind of easy to tell who was going to go ahead and get their WrestleMania match. As we get going, like I said, into WrestleMania season, now that it is less than a month away. So, first off, we had the women's elimination chamber match. We had a few participants in there that definitely, um, definitely, stole the show, but we did kind of know where it was going to end up at the end. And I would say it was easy to kind of predict Becky Lynch pulling that off and then, going to face Rhea Ripley for either a main event or a co-main event at WrestleMania weekend. And that did indeed happen. Becky Lynch pulling off the win. We had a really great crowd reaction to Tiffany Stratton. Not a native, but she is definitely over with the crowd, younger, and becoming more and more popular. Naomi and Liv Morgan both had good showings as well, as did Tiffany Stratton, like I mentioned before. But then I will say once we got down to the final three, and then of course, Raquel Rodriguez in there as well. But once we got down to the final three, it was Belair pinning Rodriguez, resulting in a final three of Belair, Morgan, and Lynch. Belair was then eliminated by Morgan. So Liv Morgan gets the quick elimination on Bianca Belair, who is immediately countered into a manhandle slam by Becky Lynch. She gets the quick 1, 2, 3, and that match is over. And then we have, like I said, Becky Lynch, predictably, but still a fun match with a lot of performances from Liv Morgan, Raquel Rodriguez, Bianca Belair, and Tiffany Stratton, as well as Naomi, that definitely wowed the fans in Australia. But again, Tiffany Stratton was pretty wildly over, and it's I would say it would be hard to argue that she might be put in the winning spot a year from now, or maybe 2 years from now. Just with this momentum, if she continues to impress and continue to have this popularity, especially in places outside of America, then you can only assume she is going to be on the rise and in demand as the years go on. And then, Bianca Belair, obviously a good hand, obviously a huge star, but, they are definitely building the Becky Lynch at Mania, so they and decided not to put her over here. I will say the finish in which Belair eliminates Morgan, is eliminated by Morgan, and then Morgan being eliminated by Becky Lynch, was a very great finish, very fast, very kind of unpredictable in a way. You don't expect finishes that fast anymore. Generally, they don't happen as much. But still really interesting, really fun ending to a match that was, like I said, a lot of fun. But I think the finish was the thing that a lot of people are going to remember just because of how fast those last two eliminations took place. And yeah, it ends up with Becky Lynch pulling off the win, and again, facing Rhea Ripley for the women's heavyweight championship at WrestleMania. So next up on the card, we had the Judgment Day taking on the New Catch Republic. The New Catch Republic is a tag team based out of England with Tyler Bate and Pete Dunne. They are kind of a tandem that has been together, obviously, but they are together on the main roster for the first time. And they also had some new theme music, and their current name is the New Catch Republic. And I think this team only can go up. They are a, sort of British strong style English wrestling scene, English indie wrestling scene, sorry, based team. That's where they grew up. That's where they came out of when they were first, coming up in the business. But I think that in the main roster, if they're booked well, if they're not booked like jobbers, then I think they're, the sky's the limit realistically, and they can not only be just decent mid card hands, but I think they could also be great champions in short order. So unfortunately, that's not going to happen this time, simply because the Judgment Day were defending their tag team titles, and it is likely they don't drop those titles until possibly WrestleMania. They might not even drop them there. But I would say if Judgment Day is going to drop their titles soon, then it will likely happen at WrestleMania, but of course not here. New Catch Republic have a great showing. Fans of the R-Truth angle and Judgment Day are going to be upset because R-Truth actually showed up in Austria rather than Australia, and they played a video package showing that storyline update. But I should say that was still funny. It was still entertaining. So if you like R-Truth, you'll love it. I'm just saying you're not getting any direct reaction with R-Truth and Judgment Day in this match. Dominic Mysterio's continuing to get insane heel heat, and exactly what they want from him, exactly what they want from Judgment Day. And fans definitely behind the New Catch Republic here, but obviously Judgment Day is going to continue to hold their titles, like I said, until Mania likely. This is awesome chance, big match, big fight feel, and the crowd really enjoyed it. And then there was a great finish with a double South of Heaven. And then Balor follows it up with the finisher coup de grace, obviously his classic finisher, not the demon tonight, but it's his finisher whether he's the demon or not. And I will say that demon gimmick has seemingly been retired at this point. But regardless, Judgment Day retained the titles, and we will see what happens with their titles and their status as champions going into WrestleMania weekend. And next we get a segment with Cody Rhodes, Seth Rollins, Grayson Waller, and Austin Theory. Obviously, an episode of the Grayson Waller Effect. Grayson Waller having Seth Rollins and Cody Rhodes as his guests. And then kind of bringing Theory in the background as his lackey, which is usually how that works. Grayson Waller is basically asking questions about the main event of WrestleMania, but doing so in a heel manner, for sure. Cody Rhodes and Seth Rollins obviously getting the babyface applause. When Reigns and The Rock are mentioned, they are getting the heel boos. And Cody Rhodes goes ahead to challenge The Rock in a one-on-one, but Seth goes ahead and gets up and says, actually, Cody, don't fight this alone. I want to help you out. So they're very much telegraphing that tag match. And I'm sure if you watched SmackDown this past week, you would know that they did officially announce tag match Seth Rollins and Cody Rhodes versus The Rock and Roman Reigns for night one, likely the main event or co-main event of WrestleMania night one. And we will go ahead and cover, the context of that match and what exactly was said in a later episode, but they already telegraph it here. So it's fair to know at this point, just by watching Elimination Chamber, that was already going to happen. And then you have a beatdown of Austin Theory gets in the way and he pays for it. Cody and Seth, take care of him and don't really have to deal with Grayson Waller, but, two heels trying to, one of them being more smarmy than the other, and the other is kind of the cannon fodder. So, good segment there. And then we have the namesake of the event, the men's elimination chamber match. Another match that was decently predictable, I'd have to say, in regards to the result of who will be in the WrestleMania match, given the opportunity against Seth Rollins. Drew McIntyre comes out to a lot of boos. We get Kevin Owens, Bobby Lashley, Randy Orton, LA Knight, and finally Logan Paul. Logan Paul drawing in his pod, his Elimination Chamber pod, and taunting Kevin Owens because of their ongoing feud. And obviously a lot of heel heat for Logan Paul. He's not very popular in general, but especially not here with 50,000 people plus in the crowd. And then, look, LA Knight, Randy Orton, AJ Styles. AJ Styles wasn't in this match, but the reason I mention him is because he will likely be facing LA Knight. So he actually got involved in this match, and it resulted in LA Knight being eliminated by McIntyre taking the opportunistic pin. So Randy Orton and LA Knight were both people that could have won, and I think it would have been great for either of them to have a Mania match. But LA Knight is actually foiled in that opportunity by AJ Styles and then is pinned by McIntyre. LA Knight stays in, but sorry, Randy Orton stays in. He eliminates Kevin Owens with an RKO. And then the final three is Randy Orton, McIntyre, and Logan Paul. There's a high spot where Logan Paul performs a cross-body dive from the top of a pod onto McIntyre. Logan Paul gets eliminated by an RKO from Randy Orton. Tries to do a brass knuckle heel interference spot, but he's not able to. McIntyre takes the pin on that brass knuckle shot to Orton that Logan Paul was trying to cash in on, but McIntyre takes it instead and wins the chamber match. So obviously we have Logan Paul likely taking on Kevin Owens, LA Knight likely taking on AJ Styles, but the main attraction with this match is Drew McIntyre winning and taking on Seth Rollins. So I will say, again, decently predictable, but McIntyre and his feud with Seth Rollins has not only been booked well, but I just think it makes the most logical sense. And I think it is the right decision, all things considered. What with CM Punk being out, he was the original choice for that spot. But I think not only is Drew McIntyre a capable hand for that, but his character work as of late has been absolutely incredible. And I don't think there's anyone really more deserving right now of that spot than Drew McIntyre. So he will face Seth Rollins for the men's world heavyweight title. Not sure which night because we already pretty much have the main events confirmed. But regardless, that is what's going to happen. McIntyre taking on Seth Rollins for his heavyweight championship. So the final main event match of the night is Rhea Ripley taking on Nia Jax, obviously defending her women's heavyweight title. Did mention it earlier. Nia Jax is no slouch, but it's the home country of Rhea Ripley. She gets an insane pop, and I think it would be poorly timed, and it would be remiss of WWE to not book Rhea Ripley to take the win here. And that's exactly what they did. They booked her to take the win. And, Nia Jax held her own, but she did, in fact, lose to Rhea Ripley here. Sort of at the finish of the match, she hits a Samoan drop on an announce table that doesn't break. And then there's a splash through the table, but Ripley kicks out, and then she ends up winning the match with a superflex, then a riptide combination. And that's your main event. Rhea Ripley defends her title successfully against Nia Jax. And I think that not only was that the right decision, but it was just what we all saw coming. And I do think there could have been a better main event here. Maybe they could have put the men's Elimination Chamber match in its place. But they definitely wanted that hometown reaction, or home country reaction, I should say, from Rhea Ripley. And they kind of, I think, wanted that to close out the show. And so if that was the intention, then they did a good job. Because, yeah, she was the main thing I think a lot of people were talking about going into this show. And so they only naturally wanted her to be the main thing people are talking about going out of this show. So, without further ado, I'm going to end that here. That is your Elimination Chamber 2024 review. And we're going to go ahead and review TNA's No Surrender pay per view right after this. Well, we are at the last segment of the show. Time for TNA's No Surrender, a review of the show. And go ahead and look forward to TNA Sacrifice, which will also be included in the next episode of the show. Get a review of that as well, has been the more recent pay per view. So we're going to go ahead and be able to be in touch with Impact and Recent with their programming, just as is the goal with AEW and WWE. Like I said, you'll get your AEW Revolution review. And other than that, we'll be doing our weekly television reviews as well, just as I get back into the swing of things. Like Dustin Rhodes once said, keep stepping. And that's what I'm going to be trying to do coming back from my brief hiatus here on the show. So, with all that out of the way, I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and let's get into TNA No Surrender. So TNA No Surrender took place on the 23rd of February, and PW Insider did report that the attendance was 750 people. The venue was previously only set up for 600. They added 150 seats to accommodate, and it took place at Alario Event Center in West Wego, LA, Louisiana, not Los Angeles. So I would say that the countdown here, the pre-show, um, pretty intense first opening match for a kickoff show. TNA obviously has been leaning into the internet fan base, the sort of IWC, in the same way that AEW has with these kind of high octane cruiserweight matches. They obviously call them X Division. But this match, I think, really takes the cake in that trend. Trey Miguel and Zachary Wentz of the Rascals, taking on Speedball, Mike Bailey, and Trent Seven, combining under the name Speedball Mountain, a reference to Mustache Mountain, which Trent Seven was a part of. And Speedball Mike Bailey was never in that group, but his name is Speedball, so they just kind of made a combo tag team name, much like, Show Miz when The Miz and Big Show were together, or Golden Truth when Goldust and R-Truth were together. So regardless, Trey Miguel, a former X Division champion, and Speedball Mike Bailey, also a former X Division champion. Unfortunately for Bailey, they lose this match against the Rascals, continuing to build heel momentum around that team. And, high octane, like I said, X Division based match, even though it is a tag match. So it's obviously in the tag division. But, all these guys in singles competition are X Division, or if you're not in TNA, cruiserweight wrestlers. That's what these guys are. So if you like that kind of wrestling, you're going to love this match. But the Rascals, unfortunately for fans of Speedball, Mike Bailey, and Trent Seven, the Rascals do come away with the win here. The second match on the kickoff is a pretty big deal of a match, too. This one's not a slouch, but it does give us another combo tag name. We have Eddie Edwards and Brian Myers, who are in the system, kind of that heel faction that's attempting to take control of TNA, which we will see a development on that in the TNA Sacrifice review when that comes out. You'll go ahead and see what I mean when we get to that. There's a big tag match that results in a new development, has to do with the system. And again, we'll cover that when we do our review of that show. But in any case, in this match, Eddie Edwards and Brian Myers of the System defeat Kushida and Kevin Knight, known as the Jet Setters, for this match. Another heel tag team going over in the kickoff show. But it makes sense. The System is trying to be dominant with their, leader, Moose, the world champion. They have to, pick up wins too in order to make themselves look as big as their leader. And, leader, somebody they're building up as big as Moose does not want to be around losers. So they have to have the System get some wins under their belts as well. And that's what happened here. And again, stay tuned to hear about what goes on with the System at a TNA Sacrifice when that review comes out. But let's go ahead and get to the main card for No Surrender. TNA World Championship #1 contenders match. Eric Young taking on Frankie Kazarian, two Impact veterans, two TNA veterans, and two guys that not only can have great matches, but can have great matches together. These guys have been in the ring many a time through TNA, and these guys are obviously great singles wrestlers in their own right, but when you put them together, gonna be a great match, and that's what we got here. Eric Young defeating Frankie Kazarian. Frankie, ever since he attempted to win the TNA title by getting that opportunity, foregoing his X Division championship, surrendering that in the surrendering that in order to get a TNA title match. Ended up losing the title match, and he's kind of back to square one now, especially after losing this #1 contenders match to Eric Young. So we're going to have to see if he's able to pick up momentum going forward. But Eric Young has that #1 contenders match, setting up him to face Moose at Sacrifice. You'll hear the result of that as well when we get the review of Sacrifice. But that would be the TNA World Title matchup, Eric Young taking on Moose as a result of his win here at No Surrender. Next up, we have the TNA World Tag Team Title match. Ace Austin and Chris Bay, also known as the ABC. They are the World TNA Tag Team Champions, taking on James Drake and Zach Gibson, also known as the Grizzled Young Veterans. Grizzled Young Veterans are still trying to find their footing here in TNA as they returned, left WWE, left NXT rather, and they're back on the indie scene and in TNA. Unfortunately, they don't come away with the win here, but I'm sure not only is this not the last we'll see of them, but I'm sure they'll have plenty of big momentum shifting wins in their future. But ABC does retain here, and I think it is smart to keep the belts on ABC right now, especially as you have other big tag teams emerging, as we saw at the beginning of the card. And, ABC is going to have no shortage of competition, and we will find out what happens with them and their belts at No Surrender. Sorry, Sacrifice. We're currently reviewing No Surrender, but we'll find out what happens with their belts at Sacrifice. And they do keep the belts here, though. PCO defeats Khan. Khan, obviously formerly of WWE and NXT. Who's part of the Ascension, and he is defeated here by PCO in a disqualification win for PCO. But of course, we all know kind of how disqualifications work. Khan had the sort of dominant moment at the end of the match, which resulted in a disqualification and therefore gave PCO the win. So obviously a big deal when any match ends up in a disqualification. It usually, continues a feud. It usually leads to bad blood between the two wrestlers. And we will have to see what happens with PCO and Khan going into the future. And if they, if PCO maybe gets a clean win back, maybe if Khan gets a clean win, maybe if PCO gets a disqualification win, they might not even fight again for a while here. But I'm sure one or both of them will be present at Sacrifice, so we will find out what happens with that. But next we have the TNA Knockouts Tag Team Championship, MK Ultra, obviously the team of Killer Kelly and Masha Slamovich. If you couldn't tell, the MK comes from the M in Masha and the K in Kelly. They defeat Decay, Rosemary, and Havoc to become the new champions. So MK Ultra are the new Knockouts Tag Champions, and I think putting Killer Kelly and Masha Slamovich together to form a tag team was a great decision because they are both such dominant singles female wrestlers on their own. But what with the kind of return of Jordan Grace back to the top of the card here, Naomi had her time in the sun with TNA, and obviously her name was Trinity. But anyway, they had to shake up the women's card a little bit. So I think giving these women something to do was important, but also giving them titles was even bigger of a deal. And Rosemary and Havoc are great. They were great tag team champions there. Sorry, for a while, and they held it down. But MK Ultra has won, and they're the new women's knockouts tag team champions. We'll see what goes on if they defend the titles at Sacrifice. We have Josh Alexander taking on Simon Gotch here as Alexander looks to climb his way back up to the card after his, large reign was unfortunately ended through injury. Alex Shelley had a run with the title, and now Moose is the champion. So Alexander's trying to regain his footing, get back up the card, and show that he can be not only a champion again, but that he can be a dominant force in TNA, whether he has gold or not. So he defeats Simon Gotch, and Simon Gotch, another just like Khan from that match against PCO. Khan was, Simon Gotch is also a former NXT tag team wrestler, tag team specialist. Simon Gotch, one half of the Vaudevillains with Aiden English, who is now a commentator on TNA. So that connection is definitely going to be awesome. And we're going to see how that they have teased it for sure, but we're going to have to see how that, ends up eventually culminating, if at all, in some kind of feud or storyline. But regardless, Simon Gotch, former NXT tag team wrestler as part of the Vaudevillains, just like Khan with the Ascension. And Simon Gotch does unfortunately lose here to Josh Alexander, but still a big name, still a big deal to see him back in the ring after a while where he was not in a major company, and now he is again. So going to be interesting to see Simon Gotch's trajectory through the TNA card. We'll just have to see how that develops. But again, we're going to have to see how Josh Alexander develops back as a singles wrestler without the title. And I think his win against Simon Gotch definitely helped him with momentum. So now we have the TNA World Championship match. Moose taking on Alex Shelley. And I think you can kind of guess what's going to happen here. Moose retains, defeating Alex Shelley. If his tag team, I mentioned this at the top of the card, but if his tag team wins, there's no reason he shouldn't win. They need to have his faction look dominant right now as they climb their way up to the card, up through the card as a dominant heel tag team. And they just need to look good. They need to be firing on all cylinders, and they need to win every match that they can. So, obviously Moose defeats Alex Shelley. They're going to continue making him a huge, huge dominant champion until likely somebody like Nick Nemeth, is able to dethrone Moose. I think they're going to put Nick Nemeth in that spot, the wanted man. He was not on this card. And that could change. I don't have a crystal ball, but it does feel like they are setting up Nick Nemeth to eventually dethrone Moose for the TNA World title. But of course, as I already mentioned, they're going to have Moose take on Eric Young in a title defense at No Surrender, at Sacrifice. And so as a result, we're going to have to wait a little bit to see Nick Nemeth possibly take on Moose for that World Championship match. Next up is the TNA Knockouts World Title match. Jordan Grace defeating Giselle Shaw to retain. Sorry, I butchered her name, Giselle Shaw. is a great hand to have on the TNA card, and she's been a great singles female wrestler. But unfortunately, I don't think anyone really saw her defeating Jordynne Grace. They're really trying to build Grace as the dominant female champion again after she had that great run last year. And then she went and debuted more of a just kind of appearance, less of a debut and more of an appearance for WWE in that Royal Rumble. If it was a debut, she would still be in the Royal Rumble, in WWE right now, but she only showed up at the Royal Rumble, and that was kind of it. But that was still a huge appearance, still very interesting, and still an opportunity for TNA to maximize its brand recognition and to maximize the recognition of its champions. So Jordynne Grace continuing going on a great run here with the title in TNA, and we're gonna have to see who her next challenger is. Likely another women's title match will show up at Sacrifice, but we're gonna have to see who that is that takes on Jordynne Grace for her title. And then finally, Mustafa Ali, the new TNA X Division champion, after a successful bout against Chris Sabin. And I think this one was also a little bit predictable, but not that it wasn't a good match. And it was also just the right thing to do. I think Mustafa Ali is somebody that we all wanted to see with gold years and years ago at this point. And now that he's back in TNA, back on an indie, an indie show, an indie card, I think that this is the right place to do it, right place to give him gold. And hopefully he only goes up from here, because we all love seeing Mustafa Ali with gold, and we all love seeing him in fun cruiserweight X Division bouts against people like Chris Sabin, who are proven veterans in this division. And there's nothing Chris Sabin really loses by losing that title, because he still has a squeaky clean, perfect reputation, and he's going to be a dominant force in TNA, whether he has a title or not, much like his tag team partner, really, Alex Shelley, who lost the TNA world title. The Motor City Machine Guns are so vital to the legend of TNA at this point that there's nothing they really lose by losing these titles. There's nothing they lose to their reputation or their, kind of aura or their presentation. They are still very dominant wrestlers, despite the fact that they lost these title bouts. Mustafa Ali's leaning into a presidential gimmick, what with the election year coming up, and he's booking all of his indie shows, or billing all of his indie shows, I should say, as part of a election cycle, as part of a tour, as part of a kind of press junket. And I think that's really interesting booking, but it's funny, it's good self-promotion, and it's a good gimmick overall. And I think Mustafa Ali's really making the most of his post WWE run right now. And again, I think it only gets better from here. I think him having gold was 100% the right thing to do, and it'd be interesting to see how long they keep that X Division title on him. He has aligned himself with grizzled young veterans as well, so we'll have to see if that ends up becoming an official faction, or if that ends up becoming anything related to a feud or a storyline in the near future. But here, Mustafa Ali wins the X Division Championship against Chris Sabin, and we'll just kind of have to see what happens with his storyline and booking over time. But that'll do it for the No Surrender review. And as I mentioned multiple times in this review, we will have the Sacrifice review. So please keep an eye out for the next episode of the Marksville Wrestling Podcast, which will feature the AEW Sacrifice review. AEW Revolution review and TNA No Sacrifice review, and a lot more. You'll just have to wait and see and find out what else we have in store for you here on the Marksville Wrestling Podcast. But without further ado, that'll do it for this episode. If you enjoyed, please consider subscribing to the Marksville Wrestling Podcast at Marksville Wrestling Patreon, patreon.com/Marksville Wrestling. And I hope you have a great rest of your day wherever you are. This is the Marksville Wrestling Podcast. My name is Owen. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.